So today I've partnered with ASUS to compare the 2021 Vivobook S14 to the all-new S14X. This is a massive design change and performance jump compared to the previous year, and this is kind of a good way to show you guys the difference between the newer model and the previous one. From a design standpoint, they both rock an aluminum alloy chassis, but as you can see, the newer S14X is in a bigger one. They changed the old 16:9 aspect ratio and decided to go with a 16:10. You guys know me, I prefer 16:10. It just gives you a bit more vertical space, and these laptops are designed for productivity, and it just makes a lot more sense. Now there's an all black model, which I have here, and they're really focusing on aesthetics. So they've have a raised platform on top of the lid with the ASUS Vivobook branding. And then of course you have this cool little pattern. When you look at the previous model, all it is just like your general laptop. Like this looks like a lot of other laptops. You just have the name on it and that's about it. Now this is a little bit heavier at 3.59 pounds compared to 2.87. So obviously that's a bit of an advantage to the previous model, but 3.5 pounds is still very light, especially considering what you get with this, which I'll get to shortly. Now in terms of ports, they're actually quite similar. They both have two USB-A ports and two Thunderbolt 4 ports. They have an HDMI port, an audio jack. The only difference though is that the 2021 model comes with a micro SD card slot and the newer 14X does not. Construction is very solid on both of these models. Not a lot of lid flex. They can both be opened up with one hand. However, as you can see, as I'm opening the 14X, it takes a bit longer for the base of the keyboard to hit the ground. That's because the hinge is stiffer on the newer model. That means there's less wobble when you have the display open. Not that the older model had tons of wobble, there's a little bit, but there's a lot less on the newer version. The keyboard layouts are identical. However, the big difference though is that you get bigger keycaps with the 14X. It's a deeper body, so there's more space to place them. And the typing experience overall feels nice and tactile. I do love the accent pieces on the 14X. Like having that orange escape key is kind of classy, and the ribbed or patternized enter button also looks great. There's even little lines on the bottom to give it its own unique look. There's backlighting on both with a few different levels. You even have a ribbed hinge to give it some unique perspective. But most importantly, you have a massive touchpad. Like this touchpad is huge compared to the old one. I think it's like double the size, which just gives you a lot more space to move your fingers. You can place the display all the way back 180 degrees on the 14X, whereas on the previous one, it kind of stops right here. Now you do have a webcam on the newer model and a safety switch if you want to block it physically, whereas on the previous 2021 model, you do not. They both have a fingerprint scanner. The 2021 model is using the older style, whereas the 14X has the fingerprint scanner, which obviously supports Windows Hello, embedded into the power button. But one of the best features of the 14X is hands down the display. Like, don't get me wrong, the 2021 model has a great IPS panel. It gets bright, the screen is matte, so it reduces reflection, but it's like going from a Volkswagen Rabbit to a Porsche Taycan. These new OLED panels are absolutely stunning. Not only do they have impeccable contrast ratios, color gamut, color accuracy, Pantone validated, but they're brighter. Like peak brightness on this guy is up to 600 nits, so it's good for HDR. Like if you're someone who's buying this to edit photos or do any sort of design work, you're really gonna love this display. But most importantly, they fixed the PWM flicker from the previous generations. There's an option in the ASUS settings that allow you to adjust the dimming so it doesn't affect your eyes. Now, the biggest difference between both of these laptops is the CPU. The previous version was using an i7-1165G7, which is an 11th gen U series processor. The newer model skipped the U, it skipped the P, and went straight for the H. And as some of you guys know, the H processors from Intel are their best mobile chips they have. They're the fastest. Now they do suck up a lot more power, which is normal, but ASUS is topping it out at 45 watts, which is still significantly higher than the 15 to 28 watt U series processor on the previous model. And because of this, you're getting over 2 times the performance compared to 2021. So anything CPU related, like compiling code, will be better or significantly better on the newer model. Even if you're doing Photoshop work, because the CPU has a lot more horsepower to work with, it's just going to be able to process those photos faster. Even single core clock speeds got a huge update compared to the previous one. And as you can see here, multi-core speeds are even better. So one area I was kind of worried was the fan noise. Like, this is an H series processor in a thin and light form factor, but it doesn't get any louder than the previous 2021 model. Like, don't get me wrong, the fans do kick on a bit earlier compared to last generation, but fan noise is very similar. Like, you keep this thing on balanced or whisper mode, it's gonna hover around 40 or below. If you put this thing on performance mode, and this goes for the 2021 model as well, it's gonna go over 40 decibels just because you're using as much performance as possible, and it has to keep the CPU cool. Now, the internals are very interesting. They both have bottom firing speakers, but the design is a bit different on the 14X. In fact, it gets about 1 to 2 decibels louder and has a bit more depth to the sound. NVMe SSDs are upgradable on both, but the newer 14X has way better read and write speeds. RAM is completely soldered on the 2021 version, whereas the new one, you get 8 gigabytes soldered on, but then you have an extra slot to play with. So you can upgrade this to 16 gigabytes if you really want to. Battery was one area I was convinced that the new model would lose since it was using an H series processor. This is a 70 watt hour battery compared to 67 watts, but I was able to get about 13 minutes more of battery life on the new version compared to the previous one, which I thought was absolutely insane. You have a bigger fan, double the heat pipes to keep the CPU cool on the newer model compared to only one fan and one copper heat pipe. So by now, I think you can see why ASUS wanted me to compare the 14X to the previous 14. This is the biggest jump in terms of performance and design the Vivobook lineup has ever seen. Not only is this H series processor 2 times faster, they also paired it with a gorgeous OLED display. I think if you're someone who uses the CPU a lot, specifically a developer or someone who uses Photoshop or Lightroom, you'll appreciate this a lot more compared to an Ultrabook with a U series processor. It's very easy to just stick the latest U series processor in a design year over year. It's a lot harder to make an H series processor, which requires a lot more power to perform and function like a more efficient one. And I think they nailed it with the S14X. Now look, this doesn't have a dedicated GPU, and I think if they stuck one in here, it would increase the price significantly. And not everyone needs a dedicated GPU. So if you're someone who really appreciates good CPU performance in a package this small, I think they did a good job. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.